Good morning, boys and girls, or afternoon. I don't know what time of day you're watching and listening to this story. But we are going to continue reading The Riverbank, Part 2. This is Chapter 2 of The Wind in the Willows. We're starting by looking at our map because it will give us a lot of information about our story and how our setting changes as we go through the entire story. We started out in Mole's house. Mole came out of his house. He saw Rat's house. And then they got in their little boat and they are traveling down the river. So let's go back up to the very beginning and take a look at our story again just to make sure we remember. Here's Dear Little Mole. Oops, sorry. Having a struggle. Okay. Dear Little Mole started out in his house. Do you remember what he was doing? Spring cleaning. Did he love it? No. He gave up. He sort of quit and he said, I'm done with it. Maybe he was done with it, but it sounded as though he just put it away and said, I'm going out, and it was spring. He started to meander around the riverbank and he met a new friend. He met Rat, who immediately invited him into his boat to take him on a trip. And Rat is teaching Mole all about the world that Mole is unfamiliar with. So here we're going to begin Chapter 2. Before we do that, before I begin to read, I want to make sure that you are listening really carefully to ways that Mole learns about life on the river. And he learns about that by speaking to Rat. We call this part of the story when characters speak back and forth to one another. We call that dialogue. And how do you know when you're reading dialogue in a story? You know that you're reading dialogue because dialogue has quotation marks around it. The exact words that a character says is put in quotation marks. Dialogue is one way that an author can describe a person or a place or a thing, or give the reader information in a story. There's another part of a story that tells what's happening and does not have quotation marks around it. So it's not dialogue, and that would be narration. So you can have a narrated part of the story where someone is just telling you what's happening, or you can learn about what's going on in the story through dialogue. Narration and dialogue are two literary tools or two ways that an author tells a story. We just talked about the setting, and through whose eyes do we first discover this riverbank? Well, we first discover the riverbank through Mole's perspective. Please say the word perspective with me. Perspective. Perspective is how someone sees or experiences something. In fictional stories, perspective is another literary tool, like dialogue and narration, and it lets the reader know from whose experience the scene of the story is mainly being described. Like dialogue, perspective can shift from one character to another as a way of telling more about the story. So in Mole's house, you remember his actions and dialogue, that the entire story begins is being told from Mole's perspective. And the reader first hears about the above ground world and the riverbank from Mole's perspective. Well, we're going to be introduced to another character today. It's an otter. So don't be surprised when you see the otter. Otters are playful creatures. They're great swimmers. They're part of the weasel family. They're semi-aquatic, which means they spend time in and out of the water like water rats. They have brownish fur, cream-colored bellies, long, strong necks, webbed feet, and long, flattened tails. They live in burrows. They eat fish, shellfish, birds, didn't know that, insects, and frogs. Otters have backbones. Their skeletons are inside their bodies. They are warm-blooded. They are mammals, which means their babies are born alive and their mothers feed them milk from their own bodies. Well, today in the Read Aloud, Rat and Mole were just getting ready to go on a picnic to the backwater. So, predict what kind of adventures Mole and Rat might have on their backwater. And then listen to see if that prediction is true.